My doctorate is in leadership and change. So dealing with social issues and economic issues or whatever, changes period, and leadership as it relates to helping to develop, manage change. That's what I do with companies, helping them to understand changes that they are going through or planning for, particularly if it's like a layoff or changes in leadership within an organization. It all has to do a lot with how they communicate with one another, if they do or if they don't, because every training that I do has a foundation of communication. I don't do any training without doing the communication piece first, because I find that in all instances where there's conflict is because people don't know how to talk to each other, or they don't talk to each other, or they don't understand what's being said because they have a closed mind, or they don't want to understand what's being said. So that was actually I guess Bonnie was the poster child for that at his meeting that we went to, because we were not talking the same language, and he spoke differently than he had spoke before when he was in the limelight on that stage, and he knew full well what he was committing to at that time. But subsequent to that, in the dim light of his relationships with whomever it is, he decided that he didn't really want to support that. He knew all along he didn't really want to support that, but he didn't know how to, or didn't come out and say that until he was confronted with that. And I think maybe it got a little bit too hot in there for him, in terms of having to sit there and answer those questions, or to come up with his reasoning for the position that he was taking. It didn't make any sense. And when I said, well, you can give us a letter of support just for the historical application, and that wouldn't harm anybody. And that's when his assistant there, Krista, said, oh, we were never asked for a letter before. And Laddie said, well, yes, he was asked for a letter. But regardless, that's not a point to argue. We're asking you for it now.
You know, he gave a letter to MD Lehman. He's been running an illegal hotel on the boardwalk for years.
Yeah, and you showed them that this is the letter of support that you gave. But he said, well, I haven't seen the application, and so until I see the application, what is there to see about an application for historical and cultural monument? What would you need to see in that application to make you decide to support or not to support it? Can you support the concept of it? Can you support the community effort to that's a goal that we have, that's something that we would like to see? Can you just support that? And I think when the point came up, for all of the years that you have been in the Venice community, supposedly serving the Venice community, what have you done in support of maintaining, sustaining, preserving any contributions of African Americans who lived and who still live in this community? What legacies, what effort, what have you done to help us in this effort that we have to say, we are here, we've been here, what can you do to help us get on the map, so to speak, get in the books, so to speak, for our legacy to be known, to be understood, to be showcased in the same way that Abbott Kinney and others are? Because if it wasn't for the efforts on the part of Tabor and Reese and other families here, Laddie's grandfather, people who lived and worked here, people who were members of that church, this part of Venice wouldn't be what it is. And even though we were relegated, ordered, limited, restricted to live in this area, You gave us swamps, and we built homes. Among ourselves, black and brown people lived here and made it their homes. And when law enforcement officers like the LAPD officer that talked about the crime in the area, yeah, there was crime, but there's also people who didn't commit crimes. There's people who sent their kids to school. There's people who were professionals. There are people who taught school like me. There's people who went to school, went to work every single day and sent their kids to school every single day, and who worked hard, whether it was being a nurse or a doctor or a mechanic or whatever. We weren't all criminals. And I understand the focus on the drugs. I was happy to see that there was a focus on drugs. A lot of our effort with Project Action was to focus on drugs, to try to get a coalition of folks who would talk about how can we police ourselves in this community. But in order to get people off drugs, you have to replace it with something. We were asking for jobs. We were asking for support. We were saying that if a person serves a period of time in prison, but they can't get a job when they get out, then how do you ever expect that person to be a productive citizen? My dissertation is about African American men who survived that gauntlet of restrictions and prohibitions and barriers and were able to stay out of prison in spite of all of those things and become productive citizens, like Michael Murray. You don't know him, but he was one of the people that I interviewed. Like Anthony Blockman. These are people who lived in Venice, whose families lived in Venice, helped build Venice. Yes, they got into trouble. They served some time in prison, but they were able to gather themselves up and get jobs through very, very, very difficult situations, because society doesn't help that. So if you serve your time, if you've paid your dues, why should you be shut out of society? It's because the prison complex, that's their living. That's the way they make money. And so for them to have you on the recidivism wheel is a way that they can continue to be millionaires. The Koch brothers that participate in the funding the prison industry. So the gang injunction that happened in Venice back in 95, 96 was all a part, I believe, of this long-range plan to get to where we are now.
Which is?
Which is gentrification. With a significant number of African American families that don't live here anymore. Don't live here anymore because of the gang injunction. Don't live here anymore because even if you were brothers or cousins or any kind of relatives, you were not supposed to hang together. How ludicrous is that? And now we're looking at the gang injunction under scrutiny as to whether or not it's constitutional or not. So everything is put on hold while that question is decided. But it never should have happened.
And damage has been done.
And the damage has been done and can't be undone. People who moved out of Venice because they were subject to arrest and harassment, and parents being threatened to have their homes taken away from them because their kids were dealing drugs. I am not a fan of dealing drugs. I mean, I think that there was a lot going on in Venice at that time, and I wish that we as community folks had been more proactive in terms of our own managing our own internal issues with drugs. But they closed the teen post, which was one of the avenues for young people to go and be together and be off the streets and to do productive things, go to events, baseball games, and to have dances and things like that. They closed the teen post, no funding. So when you don't have resources to contribute to the positivity of what you want to do, and people live in poverty, it breeds a certain behavior that I don't condone and that I don't like to see. But at the same time, we didn't get a lot of help. And I do believe that the drugs are put in this community for that purpose. Because, as it's been said many, many times, people were dealing drugs. They weren't bringing in loads of cocaine. They didn't have money to bring in loads of cocaine. They were dealing cocaine that was given to them by whom? By whom? Yeah. And what I said to the officer that day is, why wasn't the person who came to buy the drugs arrested? They were part of the issue here, right? I mean, supply, demand. If you don't have it, you can't buy it. If it's not here, you can't buy it. But you're coming here to buy it. But you're not getting arrested for coming here to buy it, but you're arresting the person on the corner that's selling it. It's a two-way street. Arrest the person that's selling it, arrest the person that's buying it.